Despite the fact that in ancient times there were dozens of state formations on the planet, ancient Egypt is considered the main one. It's not surprising considering the number of wonders of the world and the truly mighty achievements of the Egyptians, some of which are over 9,000 years old. Recently, we decided to start a new section, and now we will try to fit the entire history of Egypt into 10 minutes. It's not an easy task, and we need your help. Please tell us in the comments if you are interested in such a section. If you have any comments or suggestions about the countries to be released next, we will start and move away from history textbooks. They divide the history of Egypt into dozens of periods, sprinkle with distracting dates, and emphasize events that are not particularly interesting in the context of history. We will divide our video and therefore the history of Egypt into 3 parts: ancient, Greco-Roman, and Arab, which lasts to this day. Details and specifics are of course great, but we will set the task of acquainting you with the truly main things in the life of the country, and we will collect the details and interesting specifics of each stage in the description. Well, let's start with a small introduction and go back not 1,000, but tens of thousands of years. Africa was different then, as we told in the video about Pithecanthropus. Once tropical forests reigned here, where human civilization was born. Later, in Africa in general, and in Egypt in particular, it became drier, and the territory turned into a savanna. There are few traces of the earliest humans in the country, and scientists suggest that Homo sapiens appeared in these territories because Egypt was an ideal platform for migration from East Africa to Asia. They were black, however, about 10,000 years ago they were displaced by a Semitic people, whose origin scientists are still fighting over, and the workers settled in Egypt because of the incredible fertility of the Nile River. In fact, ancient people called Egypt the gift of the Nile. The fact is that tens of thousands of years ago, the territory of modern northern Egypt was a bay of the Mediterranean Sea. Later it became land, and at the same time a place that the Nile flooded, overflowing its banks. Numerous rains caused crazy floods, which were a gift from the gods as they made the soil fertile, and the water helped to grow anything on it. When the Nile returned to its period, the ancient Egyptians ran into its valley, sowed it, harvested it, and then ate it while the scorching sun burned the soil, making it unsuitable for farming. But only until the next overflow of the Nile, after which the situation repeated. Actually, that is why one after another settlements appeared in the Nile Valley. About 7,000 years ago, there were about 40 mini-states in the valley, and they all faced one problem: a lack of labor. The population was growing, and to continue feeding from the Nile, something had to be invented. Therefore, the mini-states united, built dams, canals, reservoirs, and other agricultural structures to, on the one hand, retain the water of the spilled Nile longer, and on the other, to sow and settle more territories. In the 4th millennium BC, the process led to the formation of 2 giga-states, Upper and Lower Nile. For some time they opposed each other, but in the end, Upper Nile won. Its pharaoh Namir and his successor Menos gave birth to what historians call the dynastic period. This is the ancient Egypt that is generally familiar to everyone, with pharaohs, pyramids, and the conventional division into early, ancient, middle, and other kingdoms. This division is conditional, so we will not dwell on it, nor on the life of the pharaohs and pyramid builders. Now we will focus on the main thing. During the pharaohs' dynasty period, Egypt became a real state. The borders finally moved away from the Nile, albeit not significantly. An army appeared which successfully defended Egypt from the nomads of Arabia, Ethiopia, and other countries. But most importantly, during this period, the Egyptians built truly mighty structures. And it's not just about the pyramids, although they are good. During the Old Kingdom period, that is from about 2700 to 2100 BC, the Egyptians mastered geometry, created a solar calendar, and even studied the stars. The Great Pyramids are the result of these scientific victories, but their construction would have been impossible without the ability to work stone and agricultural achievements. The canal systems built by the ancient Egyptians are not much less efficient than modern ones, and at the same time, they learned to bake bread, brew beer, and fully mastered writing. They even built the Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean and Red Seas. However, the climate was getting worse and the officials greedier. This led to a couple of centuries of civil wars, which for a while returned Egypt to its old fragmented state. The Middle Kingdom did not lag behind. Its borders are considered to be from about 2100 to 1750 BC. Internal strife continued, but Egypt achieved some things. They mastered bronze products, began to open schools, and introduced the use of papyrus. They also mastered the creation of reservoirs. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty revived the dried up Lake Moeris, turning it into an artificial water reservoir. Amenemhat III, through a complex system of canals, locks, and dams, gave Egypt what it needed for thousands of years. The artificial lake not only stored the floodwaters of the Nile, but also allowed the river level to be raised. Thanks to engineering achievements, just think about it. 4,000 years ago, the Egyptians could easily turn on a tap and irrigate the necessary lands. The lake's capacity was enough for a whole 100 days. The pharaoh also built himself a pyramid and labyrinths, which the ancient Greeks considered wonders of the world. Unfortunately, the period ended with almost the entire Nile Delta being captured by Asian nomads. Only a couple of hundred years later did the history of the New Kingdom begin. From about 1500 to 1000 BC, Egypt rose from the ashes. During this period, the territory reached its peak. They learned to build wells and mastered chariots. The Egyptians gave the Persians and everyone around them a hard time. It was during this era that the famous Ramses II and Nefertiti lived. Temples were built, writing was improved, and great attention was paid to the education of children. However, the construction of temples also killed the state. The priests of the god Amun plunged Egypt into chaos for 400 years. Pharaohs changed like gloves, sometimes 5 ruled at the same time, and the church almost killed the state. Then the Persians joined the fray, effectively conquering Egypt. Only by 600 BC, with the help of a mercenary Greek army, did Pharaoh Psamtik manage to shake the established order. But still, in 525 BC, Egypt became a full-fledged colony of Persia. This is an important date because from this moment on, ancient Egypt de facto ceased to exist. It was never independent again. However, it was mighty as Alexander the Great in 332 BC took Egypt from everyone, joining it to his empire. Wonders of the world were built one after another. The Great Lighthouse, the Library of Alexandria, and the entire city of Alexandria once again made Egypt a major player on the international stage, as well as the main supplier of bread and effectively the planetary capital of science. However, they began to speak and write in Greek, and traditional writing gradually died out. You know the last pharaoh of the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty well. It is Cleopatra, who eventually married Julius Caesar and in 30 BC made Egypt part of the Roman Empire. This period lasted until 642 AD, with the caveat that in addition to Rome, the country also became part of Byzantium. The period was not remembered for anything remarkable. Egypt got stuck in development, turning from the center of the planet into a food supplier. The Library of Alexandria was gradually looted. And later, the destruction was blamed on the bad Arabs who took over from the Romans. In 640 AD, they brought Islam to Egypt and assimilated the country much faster than the Greeks, simultaneously filling in the Suez Canal and working on the degradation of science. In just a couple of hundred years, the whole country spoke Arabic and even looked purely Arabic. Spoiler, Egypt remains like this to this day. In 870 AD, the country left the Arab Caliphate and for almost 700 years on paper was almost independent. The most notable figure here is Saladin, who fought the Crusaders and significantly expanded the territory of the Arab Union. Unfortunately, apart from military achievements, there was not much else. Analyzing the climate, scientists conclude that the Egyptians of this era did not use the fertility of the soil, and the country was more underpopulated than overpopulated. However, it is worth noting an important exception, Ahmed Ibn Tulun, during whose reign the Egyptians mastered textiles and developed economically. Also, in 972 AD, Al-Azhar, the oldest existing university in the world, was built. In 1517, Egypt became part of the Ottoman Empire and turned into a typical colony. The situation was similar to the Roman one, only now the country fed the Turks and followed all their orders. The only notable event was Napoleon's unsuccessful campaign. Egypt, before the construction of the Suez Canal connecting the Mediterranean and Red Seas, was a dream of the pharaohs. However, in 1869, it was completed by the French and the British, and later they took all the profits from the Egyptians. Spoiler, after numerous uprisings, Egypt will take ownership of the canal, and right now, the income from the canal is the second largest in the country, right after tourism. Around the same time, Egypt came under the watchful eye of the British Empire, effectively losing its independence. In World War I, the ruler of Egypt tried to side with Germany, but was immediately overthrown, and the country effectively became a British colony. In honor of the Egyptians, they fought this fate so actively effectively that just a few decades later, in 1936, the British granted Egypt full independence. However, the country continued to struggle. During World War II, there was a group that wanted to support Germany, and they were quickly subdued. On paper, Egypt maintained neutrality and declared war on the Axis powers only in 1945, but in fact, the British used the country as a transit point for their troops and an air base. Largely, the dances to the British tune led to the revolution of 1952, as well as to poverty, corruption, and fatigue from sultans, one after another dragging the country into the abyss. As a result, Egypt emerged in more or less its modern form. The country has a president, truly independent policies, and interests. The main one we already mentioned is the Suez Canal. Due to its nationalization in 1952, a war began between Egypt and Britain, France, and Israel. It is not difficult to guess that the poor had no chance, but help came from an unexpected place. On one side, the USA pressured its allies, not wanting wars to be fought without their permission, and on the other, the USSR saw an excellent ally in Egypt. Khrushchev even threatened England and France with nuclear strikes on their capitals. Under the pressure of the two superpowers and the UN, the war stopped, but Egypt still holds cool relations and resentment towards its opponents. But this is a story for political scientists, and we have done our part. We hope you enjoyed our retelling of the history of Egypt. If so, we would be happy to see your like and comment with thoughts on such a section. See you next time, friends.